My name is John Povey, the Reverend John Povey. I've been minister here in this beautiful Kirk of Calder for 40 years. I was ordained here in 1981. Actually, in the last 110 years, there have only been 3 ministers in this parish. Myself, my predecessor, the Reverend David Rosey, who was here 31 years, and the previous minister, the Reverend William Weir Clark, was here for 40 years. And I think there have only been about 22 ministers since the Reformation. I was brought up in the church and was in the habit of going every Sunday, went through Sunday school and into Bible class, and I always had a real interest in the Bible. I thought it was fascinating and enjoyed being in church and seeing what went on and being a part of it, having the opportunity to serve God in different ways in my own church as I was growing up. And then I just felt it was kind of like a calling. You know, we say that, but it is a reality that you feel drawn to it and that it's just the right thing to do. I would say that when I was fairly young, my own minister was an inspiration, but in the church I went to, quite a number of people actually trained to be ministers. And we had lots of assistants. Our own minister trained people. So some of them were quite inspiring, actually. Then when I went to university, one of the professors in particular was a great communicator and able to help me understand the Old Testament a lot better. He was the late Professor Davidson. The best part of the job is being with people, especially at special occasions in their lives. For example, sad occasions when you're dealing with a bereavement and trying to support people through it. But also happier occasions, the birth of a child and a baptism, when everybody's happy and coming to church for this baby's blessing. In normal times, sermons are centred around the time of the year, for example, obviously Christmas and Easter, or preparing for these events. You have particular themes, which makes it a bit easier deciding what you're going to do. Sometimes events take place in the world which can be tragic, for example 9/11 or Dunblane, and then you know that you have to come with a particular message because there'll be people there who will be worried or hurting, or they maybe even know somebody that's been involved in these tragedies because they have far-reaching consequences. So then you have to really think hard what message of comfort and hope you can offer to people. When it comes to deciding what passages to preach from, the Gospels are particularly important. You know, the parables of Jesus, for example, and the miracles. But there's some wonderful passages in the Old Testament. I particularly like the Psalms and some of the prophets. Isaiah in particular has lots of really deep passages to think about. But when you preach from these books, you have to get into the context. They're timeless, of course, but they were written at a particular time in history. So you need to understand where the writers were coming from at the time and then translate that into today's world and see where it takes you and how what people were going through then relate to what people are maybe going through now. And it's remarkable how similar it is. Many of these psalms, for example, are very personal, talking about people's feelings and how they feel about persecution, perhaps. We would call it bullying nowadays, or how people feel about loss situations, or how they feel about times of joy and happiness. So there's so much depth in much of the Old Testament. And the Psalms are wonderful to preach from. This church has been here since 1541. It was extended in 1863, but it's actually on the site of a 12th century church going way back to the time of King David I of Scotland, who was the son of Queen Margaret, often known as Saint Margaret. And during his reign and the reign of his brother, many churches were built up and down the land in Scotland. So it's a very ancient Christian site. This particular building, as I said, was built in 1541, but 20 years before the Reformation. John Knox actually visited the church in 1556, and the local people would get a chance to hear from the man himself all about the Protestant teachings. So there have been lots of historical events taking place here. The Covenanters were strong in this area, and there were trials actually around the church of covenanting people. There was even a witch trial once in this church. Yeah, that must have been quite a scary time for folk. So it's got an amazing history, the whole place. And, you know, when you look around and see these old stone walls, you can't help but think what conversations have gone on in this place as things have developed for Scotland and for Britain. You can imagine them discussing Napoleonic Wars, Crimean War, you know, and then of course in the last century 2 world wars going on and many local people affected by that. Some of the highlights of the last 40 years have been when I've taken a group to, first of all, the Holy Land, and then in the year 2000 to Oberammergau to see the Passion Play. That's in Germany. Trip to the Holy Land. I went first with a group to find out how you take a group. And then I took a group from this church and saw all around the Holy Land, started off in Jerusalem, then went to Bethlehem. I think I particularly enjoyed going up to Galilee though. It's a different climate up there. It's a lot greener, and it's actually where Jesus did so much that we read about in the Bible. Feeding of the 5,000, for example, calling the fishermen from the Sea of Galilee. There's a church in Cana, which is the village where he changed the water into wine, and he went to visit that. Went to see Nazareth, where Jesus was brought up. Jerusalem itself is special, of course, going to see the western wall of the temple, known as the Wailing Wall, and the Garden of Gethsemane, the place where Jesus was arrested, the upper room in Jerusalem where the Last Supper was celebrated. So that was a special time. A number of years ago, someone came up with the idea that the Reformation's 500th anniversary was coming up in 2017. Somebody suggested, is there anything we could do to commemorate the 500th anniversary? So everybody put their thinking caps on, and I actually suggested myself, why not do something for somebody else? And I'd already been to Peru with a charity called the Vine Trust to see about the work they do there. So I spoke to the director of the Vine Trust one day when I happened to meet him at the train station in Edinburgh. I said, oh, the very man, I want to speak to you about something we have in mind. I said, how much would it cost to build a children's home in Peru or Tanzania, because they were working there too? And he said, oh, I'll go away and think about that and get back to you. So they got back to me and they reckoned if we could raise £85,000, that would be sufficient to cover the expenses. But it grew from there, and eventually what was decided was to build a whole village to be called the Village of Hope for orphaned children by the shores of Lake Victoria in Tanzania. And that was the final project and vision. And by 2017, when we celebrated the 500th anniversary of the Reformation, the foundations were about to be laid. In fact, the following year, I went to Tanzania and I helped unveil the foundation stone. And now the village is well underway. To commemorate this, actually, Princess Anne paid us a visit to find out all about the work we'd been doing. She's the patron of the Vine Trust. A strange thing happened early in 2020 because I decided in February to tell the congregation I would be retiring at the end of August 2021. At the time, I thought, am I doing the right thing? Is it far too early to tell them? Strangely, however, it must have been the right thing to do because within a month, the church was closed because of COVID. And I thought, well, as time went on, and the church just wasn't being allowed to open for months and months, into over a year, I thought, well, it's just as well I told them before lockdown. And I was beginning to think, will we ever get back before I retire? So I was so thankful that I had told the congregation, because lockdown was really, really difficult for everyone. Having your church closed, not being able to use it, weddings cancelled, postponed, funerals having to take place just at the graveside or at the crematorium with very limited numbers. And then on Sundays, when we were allowed to open, we had to have 2-meter social distancing, which meant people had to book to come along, and that really wasn't easy. But for most of the time, the church was closed, and we're so thankful for modern technology that we were able at least to give people a wee bit reassurance and hope by giving them a service every Sunday. I came down, recorded it on the Saturday, and we put it up on the Sunday morning. The main thing I would like to see when I leave here is for the congregation to continue to support the church. Not to drift away because I'm not there. My goodness, I'm only the minister after all. And there are lots of capable people who will be taking services and leading worship and being supportive. So please, I would say to everyone, still come and still enjoy the fellowship. It's been difficult. Some people aren't back yet because of COVID, and they're still a wee bit unsure about wearing masks, and we're still not able to open up properly for cups of tea and so on. But that's all coming very soon again, and soon things will be back to normal post-COVID. So do get back to church if you've not been yet. Get back to supporting it and enjoying the fellowship and the friendship of the church.